Are you still here, Lori?
I am.
All right. So welcome, everyone. It looks like my camera is not working. Can you see me?
No, I cannot.
Strange. There we go.
You are.
All right. So hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Katie Valentine. I am the Director of Online Learning for DSF, and we are here with our first webinar of 2019, actually. And we are here with Reverend Lori Tapia, and she will be talking to us about 5 ways that OH can help your church. If you don't know what OH is, don't worry. She will tell you really, really soon. Lori is the Pastora Nacional for Obra Hispana, and we are so delighted she's here. Lori and I got to know each other. It's 2015, I believe. Yeah, she keynoted an event that I was staffing. And so it's been so great to be in touch with her over the years. And I won't delay us anymore. Let me just show you, all of you who are attending, a little bit around the platform. There's a chat box over here. We would love to just know that you can see and hear us. So please type in yes if you can, and you can tell us your name or your avatar name or where you are right now in the world so that we know that everyone is on board. I'll wait for a few answers to come in. You'll also see an open questions box on your screen. So you can type in any questions that you have there, and we will make sure that we answer them. And I'll be keeping track of that. Hello, I see a couple of other newcomers. I don't see anyone typing in the chat box, so I do want to make sure that we are visible and that you can hear us. Great, okay, thank you. Hi, Rachel from Kentucky. We're glad you're here. So I think that we're ready to get started. Lori, we're so glad you're here. I'm going to turn off my camera and just turn it over to you. And I'm your tech person, so if anyone has technical questions, then let us know, and I will do my best to answer them.
Awesome. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much, Katie, for moderating this for us and for being the tech support and all of the nits and nuts and bolts and things that we need when we're on an online platform. I'm super excited to be with you all tonight. As Katie said, my name is Lori, and I serve as the National Pastor for Hispanic Ministries for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. Super excited to be serving in this role at this time. There are amazing things happening in the Obra Hispana, and by now I'm hoping that you have figured out that OH stands for Obra Hispana, and we're gonna dig a little bit deeper into that as we move through tonight. Just to give you a little bit of background of who I am a Mexican American. Born and raised on the border of Arizona and Sonora, Mexico. And I have spent my life in 2 countries, living on both sides of the border and just enjoying life and family on both sides of the border. And so the border context for me is not only ministry-based, it is life-based, as I have, again, that's where my life is based and has been. I presently live in Indianapolis, just moved last week, drove across country. So I am getting used to some new weather. I'm so excited to be with you all tonight because I really do believe that for the time that we're living in, the more that we know about each other and the more that we are taking time to build authentic relationship and break down some stereotypes and some barriers that keep us from moving together, the better equipped we are to serve as the body of Christ and to do ministry together, to bring glory to God that calls us to serve. And so as we move forward tonight, I want to invite you, as Katie said, to please feel free to use the chat box. I want to make this as interactive as possible so that we are taking time to have conversation and to think, but also I really want to make sure that if you have questions that are just really at the center of your heart, or if there are things that you are dealing with, I really want to be able to take some time to talk about those things. So that's exciting for me. So please feel free to use that chat box and to be able to place your questions there and to comment. And Katie will keep us apprised of what's going on with that. So what are we going to discover tonight as we take this time together? First, we're going to go a little bit deeper into who the Obra Hispana is, the Obra Hispana for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. We're going to talk about five particular ways, which each of those five has, its vines connected and goes off in different directions. But we're going to talk about five basic ways that Hispanic Ministries can help your church, whether you are a Spanish-speaking church, whether you are a bilingual church, whether you are a church who feels like you have no Hispanics around you, but really understanding that whole context. And then we'll be looking at some basic next steps for working in and with Hispanic communities. So with that, I'd really like to take us to a moment to really understand who we have on this webinar. And I'd like to invite you in this moment to think for a second. When you think about Hispanic Ministries, what do you know? And I think of this in this context. I often talk about how we know what we know. And so I know that 2 + 2 is 4. We know what we don't know. I have no idea what 240,000 times 690 million is. And I know that I don't know that without a calculator. But then we also don't know what we don't know. And so there's just so much out there. I'd like to invite you to think for a second. What do you know that you know? Or what do you think that you know about Hispanic Ministries? And if you'll just take a second to think about that and just maybe respond with 1 or 2 words in the chat box, I'd like to kind of set the ground to understand where we are. And so I'm going to stop here for a second and just invite you to do that for a sec. What do you know about the Obra Hispana? Yeah, we'll talk about that, pronouncing, here in a sec. I know that it's a growing demographic. Latin cultural representation. Nice. Welcome, Whitney. So feel free to keep adding that there. That'll give us some good context as we're moving forward. So I want to talk a little bit, before we move in too deep, I want to talk about the use of the words Latino and Hispanics. This is a conversation. This could be a webinar in itself, and maybe we'll move into a course around that. But really understanding that the two words, which are very often used interchangeably, really mean very different things. The word Hispanic is referring to people who speak Spanish or are descended from Spanish-speaking populations. And so it really refers more to language than it does to anything else. The word Latino refers more to geography. The word Latino is people who are descended from the Latin American areas of our world. And so a lot of times we think of these words as used to describe race, which really in all reality, to say Latino or to say Hispanic as a race, within those you have many, many races. And so it's not necessarily accurate when we use it in that term. It works more accurately when we think about it from an ethnicity standpoint. But the easiest way to understand it is that Hispanic refers to language, or the Spanish spoken language, people who descend from or speak that language. But it also is very clear that it is not about geography, which is Latino people who come from Latin American countries. And so while you could have people from Mexico, people from the Dominican Republic, people from Puerto Rico, bienvenidos, mis amigos y amados de Puerto Rico. We could have people from Colombia. These are individuals who are from Latin American countries, but they have very different cultural contexts. And so a lot of times we think of it that way. Somebody mentioned that they had to ask how to pronounce obra hispana. So obra hispana is pronounced just like that, hispana. It is not pronounced Hispania. Hispania, I believe, comes from people trying to think about Spain and how Spain is pronounced in Spanish, but it would have a ñ sign if it were pronounced Hispania. So the N is an N sound. So understanding that is helping us to really understand the context. So thank you for sharing kind of those different pieces. The shared cultural specifics of Hispanic and Latino people. I think we'll dive a little bit into that. I'm going to move forward, and then we'll come back to make sure that we've kind of grounded that piece of the conversation. So the identity statement of the Obra Hispana and the Christian Church Disciples of Christ was adopted new in December of 2016. And it really refers to how we see ourselves in relationship to each other, to the universal church, and as the family of God. And so we, the Obra Hispana, belong to Jesus as one family, sharing our resources to grow together through our relationships. I love this identity statement. It really gives me the image of the vine in the John 15 text, how we are all part of this vine, and we must abide in Jesus, as the theme for our upcoming General Assembly talks about. And so we, the Obra Hispana, belong to Jesus as one family, sharing our resources to grow together through our relationships. The term that is often used when we talk about the Obra Hispana is Somos Uno. And that's more than a tagline, it's a theological declaration. The official name of the Obra Hispana is kind of a nickname term, and I'm going to describe that here in a bit. The original name that has been established is Confraternidad Nacional Hispana y Bilingüe, which translates into the National Hispanic and Bilingual Fellowship. While it translates into fellowship, the word confraternidad is so much more. From the context of the Obra Hispana, we struggle with that translation in itself, because fellowship often leads us to think about just the hanging out component, we gather, we come together, where the confraternidad is much more about fraternity building, about our brotherhood and sisterhood together, about the way that we live and interact, and the way that we are one together and have relationship together. But that is the official name. The term Obra Hispana really has been coined to make it easy to identify who we are. We were officially formed as this Hispanic and Bilingual Fellowship in 1981. In 1981. While we're officially formed in 1981 of that, I want to think a bit back here. See if you can answer in the chat box here. How old do you think the oldest Spanish-speaking church in Disciples is? Take a guess. Give me a guess at what you think that is.
Doing that, because I love that question. We had another good question come in, which is for looking at the terms Hispanic and Latino. Which one is most appropriate to use for when people, like when we're trying to express the shared cultural specifics? Should we use both at the same time?
It really depends. It's difficult to understand. So one of the things that's important to understand is that when we talk about, for example, the Obra Hispana, we're not talking about just a bilingual community where Hispanic culture is one. We're talking about the Hispanic culture, which is Spanish language based, which brings people from 23 Latin American countries together to be the Obra Hispana. And so you have language base as kind of that gathering point and who we are, but the Latin American or Latino context is really about being from the Latin American countries. And so while that may partially answer the question, it's gray and fuzzy and not necessarily an easy answer. For the most part, Hispanic is really referring to the community that speaks or is related in the sense of the Spanish language. So we'll stick with that. 75 years old, 1806, 180. Drum roll. The oldest church is 120 years old this year. It was established in 1999. 1899. so much for my math. 1899 should say, and it is the first Spanish-speaking church which was planted in San Antonio, Texas. And so while we have had a presence and a history in the disciples as this Hispanic community of faith for 120 years, the Hispanic population, the Spanish-speaking population, has been present from the border with Mexico and beyond for much longer than we have been formed officially as the Obra Hispana, or the National Bilingual and Hispanic Fellowship, which was formed in 1981. So why do we go by the Obra Hispana? I love this picture. When we were talking about the difference between Latino and Hispanic, this picture really has a lot to say. You notice all of the flags from the different Latin American countries, which represent where people come from, where people gather from. And then you notice just the various shades and tones that come from within that, all holding up the same world that we live in, as we are gathered to be one in this Church Universal, the body of Christ. And so the Obra Hispana actually is a term that was picked up from the missionaries from the United States and around the world who came to the Latin American countries to do the work of the Lord with the Spanish-speaking population. And so this work of the Lord was the work with the Hispanic population, became the Obra Hispana. Obra says work. That's what it translates to. Obra is a work, a work. The obra is the work. And so in this context, that's how we developed this term, Obra Hispana. Really, it came from those missionaries. So who is the Obra Hispana for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ? While we think of these churches that are worshiping differently and speaking differently, when you think about who the Obra Hispana is for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, what questions come to mind? What thoughts come to your mind? There's a lot of idea that we think about when we think about who the Obra Hispana is. The Obra Hispana brings together just so many different contexts for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, for the Church Universal, for who we are as this community of faith. That is rich in diversity, that is rich in cultural diversity, linguistic diversity. The one thing that I would challenge you to think about is that while you come into a Spanish-speaking church, the Spanish-speaking church is a church that is a multicultural church where it's not the same Spanish spoken. And so I often talk about when I come in to visit a church, for example, if I'm going to visit one of our churches in the Obra Hispana, and I'm going to come and I'm going to be with them for a Sunday and they ask me to preach, I'll usually say a disclaimer and say I am of Mexican descent, so my Spanish is from the Mexican context. There are words that I may say that in your context may be offensive. Know that I mean no offense because I'm speaking from my context. And so even though we speak one same language, we have very different terms and very different words. The same words mean very different things. Ahora, for example, for a Mexican can mean now, or it could mean in a while. Whereas for Puerto Ricans, it can also mean a different context. Ahorita. Gracias, Horacio. And so we have these terms that while we use them and we have conversation together, we often have to stop and make sure that we're understanding the same thing. And so just like a lot of us speak English, we don't necessarily speak the same English in California that we do in Kentucky, right? And so it's the same with the Spanish language. And so the Obra Hispana, for the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, we're a theological and a social voice from the Hispanic community, for the Hispanic community, and beyond. And so what does that mean? It means that our rich, diverse theological perspectives are to inform us from within our community, but they're also to inform the world and inform the way that we do mission. The same goes for the social voice. Often, as the Hispanic community, particularly in the context that we're living in today, everybody else is defining who we are. Everybody else is stating who the Hispanic community is. Everybody is bunched into one group. When we think about what we're hearing in regards to immigration, everybody becomes Mexican, when that's not the reality. When we think about the social voice that the world needs to hear from and for this community and beyond, that social voice has to be an informed voice from within the context of the community. And so we are that for the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. It's important that as we think of who we are and how we do mission, who we are and how we live and proclaim the gospel, who we are in how we worship and how we glorify God, from outside of the Hispanic context, you may never understand why we do things the way we do, why we worship in the context that we worship. One time I remember being in an anti-racism training, and the trainer was talking about the room was filled with members from a whole region, and there was probably about a third of the people that were in the room were from the Spanish-speaking and bilingual congregations. And so there was translation, and there was all of these different pieces. And the rest of the context was from the dominant white English-speaking church. The presenter continued to talk about how if we wanted to strengthen relationships, we needed to go beyond tolerance. And he kept saying, which means maybe you need to, you're going to have to deal with, you know, a 2-hour service, and you're going to have to maybe sit through a 2-hour service, and you're going to have to do this maybe in a 2-hour service. And so the more that he said that, the more it sounded like he was using a tone that was implying that a 2-hour service was not appropriate, that it was not contextually correct. And so I stopped him for one moment and I asked him if he could rethink his tone, because he was speaking from outside of the context. The 2-hour worship service is normal for us, but it's not normal for that service to go beyond 2 hours, depending on what's happening. And so this is also true often in the African American context as well. And so, yes, there's some liberation theology going on there. In this process, that's who we are. Additionally, we as the Obra Hispana, we respond to the needs, realities, and challenges with a sense of support, commitment, and affirmation of the dignity of this community within the Christian church and beyond, to the Church Universal, to the community. This is an important piece because often the needs and the realities and the challenges that are faced within the context of the Hispanic community are seen as the mission field. This community, the Obra Hispana, is a community rich in service, in community support, in mission work, in church planting, and in so many senses lives the theology of a living, breathing gospel in everything that we do. From the moment we wake, it's beyond a Sunday worship experience. It's beyond a Bible study or beyond a prayer. It's who we are as a community, which informs the way we worship, which informs the way we engage community. And for many from outside of the context, the needs are addressed more as you are the mission components and we need to serve you. And so from the Obra Hispana perspective, we ensure that as we're meeting the needs of the community, again, I could speak to the challenges of immigration in this present moment. We speak to those needs and challenges, always ensuring that the dignity of the community is held intact. Who are the members of the Obra Hispana? In the same way that our church, the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, has the three expressions of the local, the regional, and the general church, the Obra Hispana is also made up of membership, which is at the individual, congregational, and conventional level. Individuals. Who are the individuals that are part of this process? Individuals become Latinos and Latinas who are active members in Hispanic and non-Hispanic congregations of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in the United States and Canada. So let's think about this from the context we were talking about before. Latinos and Latinas, people from Latin American countries, including the United States. The United States is considered a Latin American country, who are members of Hispanic, Spanish-speaking and bilingual congregations, and non-Hispanic, meaning non-Spanish speaking congregations of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in the United States. So I could be living in, let's see, Salt Lake City, Utah, and there are no Spanish-speaking disciples congregations. There are no bilingual Spanish, English-speaking disciples congregations, and I'm a member of XYZ Christian Church. Well, no, let's say this. Everybody will understand that I'm a member of First Christian Church of Salt Lake City. So I'm Hispanic. I'm a Latina of Mexican descent. And so I'm not connected to a Spanish-speaking congregation. So does that mean I'm not a member of the Obra Hispana? No, it does not mean that. If you identify as Latino or Latina or Hispanic, if you identify and you are in a non-Spanish speaking congregation, we want to make sure that we connect you to the Obra Hispana. We want to make sure that from your context where you are, that you know that you are part of something beyond the four walls of whatever church you participate in. And so individuals anywhere who are of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, whether it's Spanish speaking or non-Spanish speaking congregation. Congregation. Here we go to Spanish speaking, Hispanic or bilingual, English, Spanish congregations, chartered or in formation and recognized in the yearbook of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And so we have individuals who are members. Then we have churches who are in the membership. So individuals and full churches. Moving to the next level, you have conventions. The conventions are the geographic groupings, Hispanic and bilingual conventions recognized by the Central Pastoral Office for Hispanic Ministries, which is where I serve, and the National Hispanic and Bilingual Fellowship. Conventions are defined by grouping geographically areas that have concentrations of Spanish-speaking and bilingual communities who are at that point working together. I think I have here, let me move forward. I want to show you this. So here's a map that helps us understand the conventions. This past summer in our biennial assembly of Hispanic Ministries, a change was made where we moved from 6 recognized conventions to 9 conventions. The reason for that was during my travels, I recognized that we had churches who were considered part of one convention, but geographically they were so distant that it was impossible for them to have relationship, for them to have fellowship, for them to support one another. And so if you look at this map, previous to this, everything on the West Coast, the red and the brown, which is now 2 conventions, was 1 convention. That was the Pacific Convention. And so what happens is we had 30, 40 churches in Southern California who are close enough to have a support system and leadership development structure and pastoral care model and all of these pieces to help them grow together. There were 8 or 9 churches in the Oregon area that were disconnected from a greater structure because they were so far away. So what we did was we realigned the 6 conventions to form 9 conventions. And so we'll come back to what the conventions are. And so just to reiterate the membership, it's the individual people, it is the churches, and then it is the groupings of churches. And so if you think about that as the expressions of our church, the individuals are like the individual church governance who are part of a region, which is kind of like the big church. And then they're in regions which come together to form the general church. And so that's who we are as membership. What's the purpose of the Obra Hispana? There's 3 main underlying purposes. Unity. The unity of who we are is about strengthening and enhancing the unity among and between us as the Hispanic nation, and in the same way, our unity among and in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ and beyond. And so in these 2 images that I have here, these are just examples of what unity looks like because of the structure of the Obra Hispana. On one side, you have a gathering of pastors. It was a 2-day pastor retreat where pastors came together to just receive from each other. I came in and was able to be with them. It's just an opportunity for them to have that fellowship, but that support system as well. Pastors and leaders from the Arizona convention gathered for a Christmas celebration with their families. And so these are just ways of visualizing what that unity looks like. The purpose of the Obra Hispana is for strengthening and enhancing that unity. The second purpose is about participation. The participation piece is about intensifying and enhancing the participation and contribution of the Hispanic communities in the activities, the projects, the programs of our church at the regional level, at the general church level, in our general ministries. And this participation, the strengthening and enhancing of this participation is about this collective voice coming together that helps serve to inform around needs and problems and concerns and virtues of Hispanics and other ethnic groups in and out of the context of our denomination. And so because we exist, the participation is enhanced and it's intensified through training, through leadership development, through a retreat model, and through all of these different pieces, through supporting seminarians, through the representation of Hispanics on our general board, for example, which you see in one of these pictures, the development of our young adults, as you see in another one of those pictures. And the third purpose is about communication. The more we think about the way we are church, when something comes out from the general church and it's mailed to all of our congregations, you all imagine when you receive it, it comes in English for the most part. And so if you are a Spanish-speaking pastor, you are going to receive that and you really don't necessarily understand what that means. And so that means one of 2 things. Either first option, it goes into the trash because you don't know what it means. And if we're honest, that's usually what happens. The second thing is that you have to go find somebody to help you understand what that means. And so information about resources in our church, information about ministry, information about opportunities for scholarship, for education, for all of these different pieces, when the communication isn't in a language that they can understand, it creates more separation. So we struggle more with the unity, we struggle more with the participation. The communication piece allows us to reach out, to help, to unite, to communicate, to cooperate, to serve together, and to be all of these pieces. And often the Central Pastoral Office for Hispanic Ministries becomes that conduit or that liaison. Presently, I'm working with Chris Dorsey, who's the president of Helm, who's getting ready to send information out to all of the churches. And we have conversation around that introduction letter needs to also go in Spanish to our Spanish-speaking churches so that the pastor has the opportunity to engage with that resource. And so that's just an example of what this communication piece is about. So what is our connectedness as the Obra Hispana? You see our expressions of the church, and then you see the conventions. The conventions, which again is those groupings, connects to all of these levels. The conventions support the local churches and the local pastors. The conventions work with and in collaboration with the regions. They support people who are going through the commissioning and ordination process. They support the process of new church planting and affiliation. They support general ministries and getting out that information and working with general ministries. General ministries often come to the assemblies of our conventions, who they hold their own assemblies, as well as regional assemblies. And so general ministries often come to participate those and provide information. So our connectedness is really important. So there's a question here about the gray areas. The gray areas presently are areas that are not part of a convention. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that there are no Hispanic congregations there, but there are, at this point, no representation of Hispanic churches that are engaged with the Obra Hispana. The interesting piece is I love this map, because a regional minister in the College of Regional Ministers recently says to me, I want to have some conversation because I saw the map and I'm not a color. And so that was really funny for me, because it sparked the interest of really looking into the demographic and strategically and intentionally looking at planting churches. And so that's awesome. That's what this is about. It's about the way we are churched together. So while we know that we have a Hispanic demographic in these different areas, there are not churches who are connected to a convention. Thank you for that question. That was an excellent question. So how can the Obra Hispana help? I want to stop here for a sec, just to double check and make sure, Katie,
I think we are all caught up.
Help me know if we've missed
everyone
any questions,
continue to use the
or
chat
if there's
box,
anything
but
that
if there's any unanswered questions, let me know. But I think we've answered all the ones that I flagged. So we're doing great on time, and yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. And please feel free to add your questions to the chat box. I want to be able to stop and answer your questions, and I'll leave some time at the end also for particular questions that you may have. So how can the Obra Hispana help your church, whether you are a Spanish-speaking or bilingual congregation or not, whether you think you have people who are connected to the Hispanic community in your congregation or not, you might be surprised. There may be people who are in your congregations who, because there really isn't anything relevant for them for their kind of Latino cultural context, they haven't said anything. And so how interesting would it be to be able to go back and really start to look at that within your own congregation, and invite those people. I would love to have a conversation. If you know that there are people in your community of faith that are that identify as Hispanic or Latino or Latina, and you recognize that they're not connected, please put them in communication with me. I would love to have a conversation with them, just to really let them know that I'm with them, and to welcome them into any of our community events and fellowship opportunities. So the first thing I want to talk about of how the Obra Hispana can help your church is in understanding justice issues from within and for the Hispanic context. So when I think about justice issues, I think about the context of the world that we're living in right now, a world full of racism, my brothers and sisters, goes way beyond a black and white context. Believe it or not, we within the Latino community, and in this point I am going to say the Latino community, speaking geographically, we have a great deal of racism among ourselves as the Hispanic Spanish-speaking community. Depending on where we're from, depending on just different standards, there's an amazing book that maybe it'll come to my mind here in a sec, that really talks about the racism that is seen in Central and Southern American countries against indigenous people, who, when you stop and you think, is not far from what we see in the United States. And so we have racism even amongst ourselves, but in the context of the greater society, we do. Whereas in certain parts of the country, our African American and Black brothers and sisters may fear being pulled over by a police officer. That is very much so more dominant with the Hispanic community in Arizona. A Hispanic driving down the road, having a police pull you over, is the same fear and the same process that you have to go through. And so understanding that from within that context, understanding the immigrations from within the context of the undocumented community, Spanish-speaking undocumented community, understanding these different pieces, understanding poverty from within the context of the Hispanic community. And so really, the Obra Hispana wants to work alongside your church. We want to bring in individuals. I'm happy to come in at any point. I'm also happy to pull in experts from within the Obra Hispana, who can come in and work with your local church, work with your region, work with a grouping of your churches, to really just have some dialogue around what are the justice issues. It's really easy to stand up and say, this is wrong. But often we say this is wrong without understanding fully how wrong it can be from within the context of the community. And so we want to be able to support the whole church in understanding why these issues are wrong, why there are certain things that are impacting the Hispanic community that need to be addressed from the white context, from the greater church context. What are those issues that are impacting this community? The second thing that the Obra Hispana can do to help is that we are super excited to be in relationship and to have connection multi-generationally. You can come into just about any Spanish-speaking or bilingual congregation across the country, and you are going to find youth, you're going to find vibrant children ministries, you're going to find people of all ages crossing through different ministry. And this is something that we do well. We do this very well in our community. And we're really interested in making sure that we can bridge those gaps that separate us. We really want to be able to have deeper relationship that helps us deepen our connection as the body of Christ. And so we really believe that we can strengthen who we are as the church, that we can strengthen our identity because we do relationship well. We feel like this is something that we can bring to the context of the church. Additionally, in the Obra Hispana, we have diverse, bicultural, cross-cultural, and bilingual leadership. We have chaplains serving in the military. We have chaplains serving in hospital settings, in hospice settings, in the jail context. We have therapists and doctors and lawyers. We have individuals who are working on so many different theological perspectives that we really feel we bring a diverse leadership context to who we are as the church. Some good examples of that. Hector Hernandez, the Reverend Hector Hernandez, is working presently with NBA in their mental health initiative and jail ministries, jail chaplaincy and jail ministries. And he is spearheading the mental health initiative for the Hispanic community and beyond, working with amazing people there from NBA. His talent and his giftedness strengthens our whole church. And so the leadership within the Obra Hispana isn't just to serve the Obra Hispana. We are all here for the whole church. Because I serve as national pastor for the Obra Hispana does not mean that I am here to serve only in a Latino context. What it truly means is that I am here to ensure the Latino and Hispanic representation in our church, but also that we are fully integrated who we are, how we are as church. That means that we all bring our gifts to the table that Jesus invites us all to, so that we can fully engage who we are as the body of Christ for the world around us. And so the diverse, bilingual, and cross-cultural leadership can really enhance who we are as church. One of the ways that I believe today is important that we can help. Media portrays the stories of our community from a very negative context. And so because of the relationships that we have, because of the connectedness that we have in community, we have direct connection to real stories from real people who are suffering in these vulnerable and impacted communities. That means people who are on the verge of being deported and separated from their families. That means people who are suffering in the fields due to inhumane conditions and working conditions. All of these issues that are impacting our community, we want to be able to tell the story from the context of our community. We don't want you to be driven by what you're hearing on the media. So we really want to be able to bring connectedness in that way. One of the ways that we're supporting the church and the need to be involved in engaging against human trafficking, in engaging in the justice issues around racism, around immigration, and around some of these other issues, it really is about bringing people to your church and to hearing real life stories. To having videos available that you can use in your worship from dreamers and individuals who are going through these different, impacted by the things that are happening in the context of our world. And so don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to call and say, Pastor Lori, I'm working on this program for our church, but we want to tell the real story. We want to be able to make sure that we can connect you to that. And my favorite is our richly diverse worship experience. Dance and drama and the different innovative ways that we approach worship from so many different contexts, some very liturgically based, some very spirit-driven, just so many different worship experiences, but all very spirit-centered and all very gospel-centered. And so we believe that as the Obra Hispana, we can gift the church with who we are as a worshiping community. And so that is another way that we can truly help your church, is just by experiencing worship together and inviting you to worship with us, and to also be invited to come and worship with you. So our present focus has kind of come into an end here. So I can get to some of these questions, I want to respect your time as well. We have identified for the next 3 to 5 years these focus areas and vision for the Obra Hispana, for our whole church. The first of those being pastoral care. Pastoral care, many of our clergy serving our Spanish-speaking and bilingual communities. So let's give you some context around this. At least 10%, if not greater, it might be closer to 15% at this point, as some people have now identified in our communities, our pastors are undocumented. So I'm talking about pastors. I have had conversations with pastors in the past 2 years who have been serving the same community for 10, 15, 20 years, who never had the conversation with their community of faith, with their church, that they were undocumented as well. And so they've been serving and loving and caring for the undocumented in their community without identifying their own status. And so this has been something that has really been a Pandora's box experience. Pastoral care, really at this point, we're understanding a greater need for mental health training and awareness and capacity building for our pastors. We are understanding that the stressors are increasing as they are dealing with the increased stress in our communities because of the immigration issues and other issues that are affecting our communities. And so pastoral care, I'm really hoping that we can create retreat environments for our pastors. The majority of our pastors, 50% or more, receive part-time pay or less, but from a cultural context, as a Hispanic pastor or Latino or Latina pastor, we don't know what it means to be a part-time pastor. We don't know what it means to work 20 hours a week as a pastor. You just are a pastor. It's in your DNA. You're a pastor when you're in the grocery store and you see someone in need. We just are pastors. And so we respond when people need things. Somebody calls at 2 a.m. Because something is happening, we respond. And that's just who we are. Office hours are not the norm for many of our Spanish-speaking pastors. And so pastoral care is a deep, deep need. The second area of focus is theological education and ministry capacity building for clergy and lay leaders. We're working with ministries like Disciple Seminary Foundation, who has the CMS program, which is the ministry, the Certificate in Ministry program, and more, with Lexington Theological Seminary that has a program, with some of our conventions who have their own Bible institutes and formational schools in place. And so we're really looking at increasing through environments also like this, that DSF has opened up to be able to utilize. We have a very strong focus, and we have been for the last year and a half, on young adult and youth development, helping this community truly be engaged in living a life fully empowered to be who they're called to be, fully empowered to live into their gifts, fully empowered to serve the kingdom of God in the way that they feel God is calling them to. Through the young adult leadership experience that we are presently, I can't even think anymore, marketing. Our next experience is in April. It brings young adults age 19 to 35 together to experience a 3.5-day environment of mental health and training and awareness, self-care, skills and leadership development and identification of gifts, looking at connecting them to mentors, connecting them to their call, dangers of a single story, and really helping identify who they are and who they're called to be in the world. The next area that we're focusing on is the development of contextual resources. And so I'm going to say something here and know that this is not meant at all to offend. But when the only resources that are created for the Anglo community, for the Eurocentric community, those are the resources that are out there. When somebody says you need a resource for children's ministry, and the resource is written for white children in a white context, it's not enough to translate it into Spanish, because it will never be relevant to the context. It is not enough simply to translate something from one language to another and expect that we have done our job. That is not what we need to be doing. What we need to be doing is creating resources that are from the context, from the spoken language, so that we can truly reach and continue to build the capacity from children's ministry all the way through, from the cradle to the grave, and so that we can be able to do that. And so we're really focusing on who are those people in our communities. We have right now a large number of people who are doing PhD and DMin work, including the Reverend Jose Morales from Disciple Seminary Foundation, who we are all praying for at this time, and others who we are looking to help us create in the future these resources. And the last thing that we're working on is strengthening our own identity from within our context, branding who we are and marketing our identity to the world around us, so that we can be seen and loved and cared for from within our community and outside of our community. And so as we look at these present focus and vision areas moving into the future, This helps us also to strengthen who we are for the whole church, and know that as we are working on these areas, we're working on these areas from within our context, but also to serve outside of our context, the greater church. And so I'm going to stop there and just leave you these beautiful images of the hashtag movement that we've been using for the past 2 years and continue to use. La Obra Now, meaning La Obra Hispana, who we are as a context of past, present, and future, who we're called to be. And so in this image, you see me with a pastoral family in Milwaukee, with a beautiful baby in my arms, just being with community. You see 4 of our Latino clergy, including myself, with Reverend Sharon Stanley Ray, who is the director of our Disciples Immigration. We had just been released from jail. We were arrested at the Capitol as we were protesting in favor of our dreamers. You see youth in a retreat in the Southeast. You see 5 different shades, colors, and images of our Hispanic and Latin community there on the lower corner. And so this is the Obra Hispana, just an image to kind of give you a picture. And so I just want to close us there and say thank you. And if there are questions.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Lori, and everyone, if you can write in your thanks and appreciation for Lori's time and her leadership and her gifts and for accepting the call to this position. And this has been so much fun. The one question I saw and was from Whitney, which is how to incorporate Latino aspects into services without appropriating culture. And that's a great question. We probably can't answer the whole thing right now. Reverend Lori probably has a few words. And Whitney, I'm about to put something on the screen after I turn it back over to Lori, where you can sign up to get more information as we continue this kind of education. So everyone stay tuned just for a few minutes because I do want to mention that. But Lori, any quick words about
Yes. Yes, and amen, Whitney. Thank you for that. There are some suggestions and some things that are not that I can say in one sentence. I would love to be able to connect with you if that's something that you're interested in diving into a little bit more. I know we're looking at the possibility of having some deeper context courses moving forward, and that would actually be a great course. And so I would love to have some conversation with you. Feel free to my email may be on here somewhere, maybe not. Feel free to reach out to me in any one of the means. Maybe Katie can get you my email.
Sure. Is that okay if I put it in the follow-up emails to this?
I will type it into the chat.
Thank you. Is that okay if I include your email in the follow-up email to this? Okay, perfect.
Yes,
I'll be sure I do that. I also put a link in the chat box. DSF has some great t-shirts. These are, we sell them at cost because they're not a fundraiser. They are a statement of faith about Jesus being an immigrant and immigrant status. And so those are beautiful ways to, it's like $10 or so. So you can get those t-shirts from us. And if you're coming to any assembly, Disciples Assembly, be sure to wear them as well. I'm about to put on the screen something, an offer. As Reverend Lori alluded to, we are looking at developing our offerings through DSF about Obra Hispana, about a ton of different topics, about how do we design a worship service that includes elements from Latino culture without appropriating Latino culture, if you're a non-Hispanic church, about mental health. And we want to offer, we want to have some in English, we want to have some in Spanish. So no matter who you are, we would actually like to expand this particular presentation into a little more full-fledged course. We don't have the dates yet, and Laura, as Reverend Lori and I were talking yesterday, we were starting to make some plans about that. So for right now, what I've done is created a button. So you'll, I think it'll show up below on your screen, and it says sign up here. This is really easy. Just click that. you sign up and give us your email, and then you're just first on the list, because on social media, sometimes it kind of goes far down and you may not see the latest and greatest. So just sign up here. You're only committing to receiving emails whenever we get those offerings in place. We'll be looking to you and to the chat box to see everything that you want, need. This would apply for, again, non-Hispanic disciples and Hispanic disciples, because we want to be able to serve both populations. And Obra Hispana does that, serves a multitude of context. Yeah, and so I know we had one more question come in. Oh, no, it was a thank you. Okay, it was a thank you for the webinar to Lori. Yeah, so those. So I'm going to keep that offer up for a few minutes, and let me look over my notes. We have a webinar tomorrow night as well on true inclusion, and that is with Pastor Brandon Robertson, who is the pastor at Mission Gathering in San Diego, and we would love to have you there. So I'm putting that link in the chat box as well. And we'd love to have you present there. And I think one final question, do you have any special words for regional new church teams?
I think one of the most important pieces for the new church teams is to make sure that that you are connecting to people from the community. So, for example, if you are in a region that already has several churches, it can be really important to make sure that as you're thinking about planting new churches, to make sure that you're including those leaders in that conversation. I work directly with all of the regional ministries, the ministers, and as we think of planting new churches, we work together in making sure that particularly when there's Spanish speaking or bilingual churches, that we are in communication continually. And so we work really well in that context. And so I would love to be part of that. We also have just developed in the Obra Hispana through our board a subcommittee, which is a working group which will continually be developing tools to support new church plants that are Spanish speaking or bilingual that are directed to support the Hispanic community. And so they will be developing tools to walk alongside and accompany these churches. That is the most important piece, I believe, is ensuring that they're connected to a community that is culturally relevant to them, so that they're getting the support that they need as they're walking through the system. So I would love to have more conversation with you if you would like to have that. Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, that's a great question. We can definitely kind of put that on the front burner too for our partnership with DSF and Obra Hispana. Perfect. I think that's it. We're right at time, and thank you so much, Reverend Lori. This has been so great and informative, and I see lots of engagement, lots of questions. So we will be reaching back out if you attended this webinar just with more information. Be sure to sign up on the button below so that we have your information in a couple of different ways. And I think that's it. Want to express our thanks and prayers and blessings, and we will see you all really soon. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you. Dios les bendiga. God bless you all.
God bless.